The spotlight hit him like a warm embrace as he walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall. The audience of 3,000 people rose to their feet before he even touched the piano. This was normal for him now. Expected even. At 32 years old, Vincent Chen had become what every classical pianist dreams of becoming. He was untouchable. The applause continued as he adjusted the bench, his movements precise and practiced. He had performed this same ritual thousands of times. Every gesture calculated, every moment choreographed. When he finally raised his hands above the keys, the hall fell silent. You could hear the breathing of people in the back rows. Then his fingers descended and Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto filled the air. His playing was extraordinary. Notes cascaded from the piano like water over stones, each one perfectly placed, each phrase shaped with mathematical precision. Critics would later call it a flawless technical achievement. They would praise his speed, his accuracy, his control. But something was missing, though most people in that audience couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. After the performance, Vincent stood in his dressing room, loosening his bow tie. The walls were covered with flowers and congratulatory cards. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from conductors, concert promoters, and music critics. A bottle of expensive champagne sat unopened on the table. He stared at it for a moment, then poured himself a glass of water instead. This had been his life for the past 7 years. Ever since he won the International Tchaikovsky competition at age 25, everything had changed. The prize money was substantial, but the real reward was what came after. Suddenly, every major orchestra wanted him. Every concert hall tried to book him. His fee climbed from a few $1,000s to 6 figures per performance. He traveled 300 days a year. Paris on Monday, Berlin on Wednesday, Tokyo by the weekend. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, backstage meetings with wealthy patrons who wanted to tell him how his music changed their lives. He smiled politely, shook their hands, and forgot their faces by the next morning. The critics loved him. They called him a genius, a prodigy, the greatest pianist of his generation. Some went further, comparing him to the legendary masters. One journalist wrote that he played with the precision of a Swiss watch and the soul of a poet. Vincent had that review framed in his Manhattan penthouse, though he sometimes wondered about the second part. Did he really play with soul, or had he just become very good at making people think he did? His practice routine was brutal. 12 hours a day every single day. He would wake at 6 in the morning, eat a light breakfast, and sit at the piano by 7. Scales for an hour, technical exercises for another hour. Then the real work began. He would break down pieces measure by measure, playing each section hundreds of times until his fingers moved by pure muscle memory. By 7 in the evening, his back ached and his fingers felt like wood. But he never stopped early. Champions don't make excuses. The penthouse where he lived was pristine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. The furniture was modern and expensive, chosen by an interior designer he met once. Everything was white and gray and carefully arranged. The only splash of color came from his piano, a black Steinway that cost more than most people's houses. He lived alone. He preferred it that way. His family called sometimes. His mother would ask when he was coming home to visit. His younger brother would send texts about his new baby, Vincent's nephew, whom he had never met. Vincent always meant to respond. He would type out messages, then delete them. What would he say? That he was too busy? That concerts were more important than family? It was easier to just stay silent. There had been someone once. Her name was Lisa, and they had met in college before Vincent's career took off. She was a violinist, talented in her own right. They had talked about starting a chamber music group together, maybe teaching at a conservatory someday. She loved hiking and cooking and terrible comedy movies. She used to laugh at how serious he was about everything. But as Vincent's career grew, the relationship shrank. He practiced more, traveled more, focused more. She tried to be supportive. She attended his concerts, even flew to Europe a few times. But eventually she got tired of being alone. Tired of canceled plans and forgotten anniversaries. Tired of coming second to a piano. The breakup happened 3 years ago. She had packed her things while he was in Vienna. Left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "You're going to be great, Vincent. You already are. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being human. I can't love someone who isn't there." He read it once, put it in a drawer, and flew to his next concert. He told himself he was fine. That this was the sacrifice greatness required. Now standing in that dressing room at Carnegie Hall, he felt the familiar emptiness creeping in. It always came after performances, this strange hollow feeling, like he had just given everything he had and there was nothing left. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back looked tired. Successful, polished, admired, but tired. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His manager entered, a broad-shouldered man who treated Vincent's career like a military campaign. "Phenomenal show," he said, though his tone was all business. "I've got the Budapest Philharmonic on the line. They want you for their spring season. Also, that perfume company is still interested in the endorsement deal. 6 figures just to appear in some photos with their product." Vincent nodded absently. Another concert, another deal, another city where he would arrive, perform, and leave without seeing anything beyond the hotel and the concert hall. His manager continued talking about contracts and schedules, but Vincent barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere. What was the point of all this? He had achieved everything he set out to achieve. He was wealthy, famous, respected. Other pianists studied his recordings, trying to understand his technique. Music students knew his name. He had made it to the top of a mountain that millions of people tried to climb. But standing at the top, he realized how cold it was. How lonely. He thought about Lisa's note, the words he had tried so hard to forget. "You stopped being human." Was she right? Had he traded his humanity for his career? Had he become nothing more than a very sophisticated machine, programmed to play piano and nothing else? His manager was still talking. Something about a tour of South America. Vincent held up his hand. "Give me a few minutes," he said. "I need some air." He walked out of the dressing room, past the stage crew breaking down equipment, past the remaining audience members lingering in the lobby. Outside, the New York night was cold and bright. Taxis honked. People rushed past, bundled in coats, heading to dinner or home or wherever their lives took them. Vincent stood on the steps of Carnegie Hall and wondered what his life was taking him toward. More concerts? More awards? More lonely nights in expensive hotels? He had spent 15 years building this career, sacrificing everything else. And for what? To be called the best? To fill his penthouse with trophies no one ever saw? A homeless man sat near the entrance playing a battered guitar. His technique was rough, his instrument out of tune. But he was smiling as he played, nodding his head to the rhythm. A few people dropped coins in his open case. The music was simple, nothing like the complex pieces Vincent had just performed. Yet something about it felt more alive, more real. Vincent watched him for a long moment, then turned and walked back inside. Tomorrow he would fly to Prague for another concert. The show must go on. It always did. Prague in December was like stepping into a snow globe. The old city sparkled with Christmas lights, and the streets smelled of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine. Vincent had performed here dozens of times, but he never really saw the city. It was always the same routine. Airport to hotel, hotel to concert hall back to hotel. Then on to the next place. Tonight's performance at the Rudolfinum was sold out as always. The venue was stunning, with its neo-Renaissance architecture and perfect acoustics. Vincent played Rachmaninoff again, along with some Chopin preludes. The audience gave him 3 standing ovations. By now he could predict exactly when they would stand, when they would gasp at a difficult passage, when they would hold their breath during the quiet moments. After the final bow, he retreated backstage. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool evening. The adrenaline that carried him through the performance was already fading, leaving behind that familiar emptiness. He sat down heavily in a chair and closed his eyes. "Excuse me, Mr. Chen?" He opened his eyes to find a stagehand standing nervously at the door. "There's an elderly woman who insists on speaking with you. She says it's important. Should I tell her you're not available?" Vincent almost said yes. He always said yes to that question. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the lingering melancholy from standing outside Carnegie Hall a week ago, watching that homeless guitarist. Maybe he was just too tired to put up his usual walls. "It's fine," he said. "Send her in." The woman who entered looked ancient. She wore a threadbare wool coat that had probably been nice 30 years ago. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, and her hands shook slightly as she clutched a worn leather purse. But her eyes were sharp and clear, watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Thank you for seeing me," she said in heavily accented English. "I know you are tired. I will not take much of your time." Vincent gestured to the chair across from him. She sat down slowly, her movements careful like someone whose bones hurt. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive, the cheap kind you could buy at any electronics store. "I have something for you," she said, holding it out. "Something I think you need to hear." Vincent didn't take it. He had dealt with enough strange fans to be cautious. "What is it?" "Music," she said simply. "A recording, very old. Very special." She paused, studying his face. "You played beautifully tonight. Every note was perfect. But you did not play with your heart. You played with your hands, with your mind, but not your heart." The words stung more than they should have. Vincent felt his jaw tighten. "I appreciate your opinion, but—" "Listen to this recording," she interrupted, still holding out the USB drive. "Then you will understand what I mean. What you are missing." She stood up, placed the drive on the table between them, and turned toward the door. "Wait," Vincent called after her. "Who are you? Who's on this recording?" She looked back at him, and for a moment he thought he saw sadness in her eyes. "Someone who knew what music is for," she said quietly. "Someone who remembered." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowded backstage area before Vincent could ask anything else. He sat alone in the dressing room, staring at the USB drive like it might explode. This was weird. This whole interaction was weird. He should probably just throw it away. It could have a virus or something worse, but curiosity gnawed at him. And beneath the curiosity, something else. That woman's words had touched a nerve. "You did not play with your heart." It was almost exactly what Lisa had written in her note. Different words, same meaning. "You've stopped being human. You don't play with your heart." Back at his hotel, Vincent couldn't stop thinking about the USB drive. It sat on the desk in his room, small and ordinary, yet somehow menacing. He ordered room service, tried to watch something on television, answered emails, but his eyes kept drifting back to it. Finally, just after midnight, he gave in. He grabbed his laptop, plugged in the drive, and waited. A single audio file appeared. No label, no information, just a generic file name, 18 minutes and 43 seconds long. He hesitated for one more moment, then pressed play. The first notes hit him like a physical force. Piano music, obviously, but unlike anything he had ever heard. The piece seemed to exist in some strange space between classical music and jazz, with hints of folk melodies woven throughout. The harmonies were unusual, unexpected, moving in directions that shouldn't work but somehow did. But it wasn't the composition that made his breath catch. It was the performance. The pianist's technique was flawed. There were passages that rushed slightly, notes that didn't quite land where they should have. By any objective standard, it was imperfect. Yet every single note carried a weight of emotion that Vincent couldn't begin to describe. He could hear joy in some phrases, the kind of pure happiness that made his chest ache. Then sorrow would creep in, so deep and real that tears started forming in his eyes. There was longing, hope, regret, love. All of it poured through this unknown pianist's fingers into the keys, into the music, into Vincent's hotel room in Prague. By the third minute, he was crying. Not gentle tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep inside, from a place he had locked away years ago. The music continued, relentless in its honesty, and Vincent couldn't stop listening. Couldn't stop feeling everything he had trained himself not to feel. When the piece ended, he sat in silence for a long time. The room felt different somehow, smaller and larger at the same time. He wiped his face with his sleeve and stared at the laptop screen. Who was this pianist? Who could play like that? Not just with skill, but with a soul laid completely bare? He listened again. Then again. Each time he discovered new layers, new emotions he had missed before. There was a phrase in the middle section that sounded like laughter. Another that felt like a prayer. The pianist had lived an entire lifetime in 18 minutes, and Vincent had felt every moment of it. Dawn crept through the hotel window, and Vincent was still listening. He had lost count of how many times. Somewhere around the 10th or 11th repetition, something inside him broke. Or maybe it had been broken for years, and he was only now noticing. All his awards, all his perfect performances, all his technical mastery. What did any of it mean? He had spent 15 years learning to play the piano flawlessly, but he had never played like this. He had never even tried. This unknown pianist, with their imperfect technique and unnamed piece, had done something Vincent suddenly realized he had never achieved. They had told the truth. Not the truth of music theory or technical perfection, but the truth of being human, of feeling everything and not being afraid to let it show. Vincent opened his laptop and began searching. He checked the file's metadata, but it had all been stripped away. No date, no location, no information at all. He tried to identify the piece, running it through music recognition software, but nothing came up. He posted clips on classical music forums asking if anyone recognized it. No responses. Over the next few days, he became obsessed. Between rehearsals and performances, he contacted musicologists, sent emails to music libraries, reached out to anyone who might have information. He hired a digital forensics expert to analyze the audio file, hoping to find some clue about its origin. Nothing worked. The recording was a ghost appearing from nowhere with no trace of where it came from. His playing suffered. During a performance in Vienna, he made his first major mistake in 3 years. His fingers stumbling over a passage he had played perfectly 1,000 times. His mind was elsewhere, still hearing that mysterious melody, still wondering who had played it and why it affected him so deeply. His manager noticed. "You seem distracted," he said after the Vienna concert. "Is everything okay?" Vincent wanted to explain. Wanted to say that he had heard something that changed everything, that made him question his entire career. But how could he put that into words? How could he explain that a random recording from a strange old woman had shattered his understanding of what music could be? "I'm fine," he lied. Just tired, but he wasn't fine. For the first time in his life, Vincent Chen felt like a fraud. He had spent his entire adult life being called a genius, a master, the best pianist of his generation, and maybe by technical standards he was. But this unknown pianist had something he didn't, something he wasn't sure he could ever find. That night, alone in yet another hotel room in yet another city, he listened to the recording one more time. And as the final notes faded away, he made a decision. He would find this pianist. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. He had to know who they were. Had to understand how they played with such raw honesty. Had to learn their secret. Because if he didn't, he realized he would spend the rest of his life playing perfect empty music. And after hearing what music could really be, that was no longer enough. The obsession consumed Vincent like a fever. Every waking moment was spent thinking about that recording, about the mysterious pianist who had played with such brutal honesty. He carried the audio file everywhere, listening to it on planes, in taxicabs, during breakfast. The melody had carved itself into his brain, playing on an endless loop even when his headphones were off. He started canceling concerts. First just one, claiming illness. Then another. His manager was furious, warning him about breach of contract and damaged relationships with orchestras. But Vincent didn't care. For the first time in his career, something mattered more than performing. He had to find this pianist, had to understand how someone could play like that. His apartment in Manhattan became a war room. One entire wall was covered with notes, printouts, and maps. He had contacted every music conservatory in Europe, every archive, every library that specialized in recordings. He reached out to retired professors, music historians, and collectors of rare performances. Most ignored him. Some replied with polite confusion. No one recognized the piece. He hired a private investigator, a woman who specialized in tracking down rare recordings and lost musicians. She took his money and came back empty-handed after 3 weeks. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted. "It's like this recording doesn't exist in any database, any catalog, anywhere. Either it was never officially recorded, or someone went to great lengths to erase every trace of it." Vincent spent hours on obscure internet forums, posting clips and begging for information. He joined Facebook groups dedicated to classical piano, Reddit communities for music identification, Discord servers where audio enthusiasts gathered. He offered money, substantial amounts, to anyone who could provide a lead. Nothing came back except speculation and false promises. His savings began to dwindle. Between the canceled concerts, the investigators, and the endless research expenses, money was flowing out faster than it came in. His manager called weekly, each conversation more tense than the last. "You're destroying everything we built," he said during one particularly heated exchange. "Do you understand that? Orchestras are blacklisting you. Critics are writing articles, asking if you've had a breakdown. You're throwing away your career for what? A recording you can't even identify? Maybe it was a breakdown. Vincent considered that possibility during his sleepless nights. Maybe that old woman in Prague had been some kind of delusion, and he was chasing a ghost that didn't exist. But every time he listened to the recording, he knew it was real. That kind of emotion couldn't be fabricated or imagined. Someone had played those notes, had lived those feelings, had poured their entire soul into 18 minutes of music. 3 months into his search, Vincent's career was in ruins. A major newspaper ran an article titled, "The Fall of a Prodigy: What Happened to Vincent Chen?" It detailed his canceled performances, his erratic behavior, his mysterious withdrawal from the classical music world. Former colleagues were quoted anonymously, expressing concern about his mental state. One critic wrote that his last few performances had been technically adequate but emotionally disconnected, as if Chen was playing while thinking about something else entirely. They were right. He had been thinking about something else. About a pianist who understood what he had never learned. About music that could make you feel everything you had been avoiding. About the enormous gap between technical perfection and true artistry. His brother called from California, his voice worried. "Mom's concerned about you. We all are." She saw that article. "What's going on, Vincent? Are you okay?" Vincent almost told him the truth. Almost explained about the recording and the quest and the desperate need to find answers. But his brother wouldn't understand. Nobody would. How could he explain that he had heard something that made his entire career feel meaningless? "I'm fine," he said, the same lie he told everyone. "Just taking a break. Reevaluating some things." After the call ended, Vincent sat at his piano. He hadn't practiced in weeks. His fingers felt stiff and uncertain on the keys. He tried to play a simple Chopin nocturne, one he had performed hundreds of times. But now, after hearing that recording, his own playing sounded hollow. Technically correct, but emotionally dead, like a photograph of food instead of an actual meal. It looked right, but it couldn't nourish you. He gave up after a few measures and went back to his laptop, scrolling through forum posts and message boards, looking for the needle in the infinite haystack. His eyes burned from staring at screens. His back ached from sitting hunched over his desk. He was losing weight, forgetting to eat, surviving on coffee and the desperate hope that the next email, the next forum post, the next lead would be the one that cracked the mystery. 6 months after Prague, Vincent hit rock bottom. His manager finally dropped him, unable to tolerate the canceled concerts and the damage to his own reputation. His bank account was nearly empty. He had maxed out 2 credit cards on research expenses and investigator fees. The apartment felt like a prison, walls covered with dead ends and failed leads. He was about to give up. Actually sitting at his desk, drafting an email to delete all his forum posts and abandon the search. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe this was a breakdown, an obsession that had destroyed his life for nothing. Maybe he should just admit defeat, try to rebuild his career, go back to being the technically perfect but emotionally empty pianist he had been before Prague. Then his phone buzzed. A notification from one of the obscure classical music forums he had almost forgotten about. Someone had replied to a 6-month-old post where he had hummed a portion of the melody and asked if anyone recognized it. The message was short, just a few lines, but Vincent's hand started shaking as he read it. "I heard something like this many years ago. A street musician in a small village in Slovakia, near the Tatra Mountains. It was a long time ago, maybe 20 or 30 years. I don't remember the village name exactly, but it was somewhere near Poprad. The musician was an old man, played in the square sometimes. I never forgot that melody. If it's the same person, he might still be there." Vincent read the message 10 times. Slovakia, the Tatra Mountains, a street musician. It was the first real lead he had received in 6 months of searching. It might be nothing. Probably was nothing. The person didn't even remember the village name, and 30 years was a long time. The musician might be dead, might never have existed at all, but it was something. After months of absolute silence, someone had recognized the melody. Someone had heard it played before, somewhere real by someone real. Vincent's fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a response asking for any additional details the person could remember. Anything at all. The reply came an hour later. The person remembered a few more details. The village was small, less than 1,000 people. It was in a valley surrounded by mountains. There was a wooden church with a blue roof. The musician had played outside a local shop on weekends. That was all they could recall. Vincent pulled up a map of Slovakia, zooming in on the Tatra mountain region. There were dozens of small villages scattered throughout the valleys. Without a specific name, it would be like searching for a particular grain of sand on a beach. He would have to visit each one, ask around, hope that someone remembered an old musician who played in the square decades ago. It was insane. The chance of actually finding this person was incredibly small. And even if he did find the right village, the musician might not be the same person from the recording, might not know anything about it. This could be another dead end in a search full of them, but Vincent was too far gone to stop now. He had burned every bridge, destroyed his career, spent his savings. He had nothing left except this single fragile thread of hope. He looked at his bank account. Barely enough for a plane ticket and maybe a week or two of budget travel. If this didn't work, he would have to go home, admit defeat, and figure out how to rebuild a life from the ashes of his obsession. He booked a flight to Slovakia that same night. No return ticket, just one way. He packed a single backpack with clothes, his laptop, headphones, and the USB drive that had started everything. Before he left, he stood in his apartment one last time, looking at the walls covered with failed leads and unanswered questions. His phone rang. It was his mother. He let it go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her now, couldn't explain where he was going or why. She would try to stop him, tell him he needed help, convince him to stay, and maybe she would be right. Maybe this whole thing was crazy. Maybe he was throwing his life away for a fantasy. But as he picked up his backpack and headed for the door, Vincent thought about that recording. About the raw emotion that had poured through it. About the way it had made him feel more alive in 18 minutes than he had felt in years. If there was even the smallest chance of finding the person who played like that, of learning their secret, of understanding what he had been missing his entire life, then he had to take it. The taxi ride to the airport felt like a journey into the unknown. Vincent watched the city lights blur past his window, wondering if he would ever see New York again, wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or following the only path that mattered. Either way, there was no turning back now. The search had consumed everything else. All he could do was follow it to whatever end waited in those distant mountains. The bus wound through mountain roads that seemed to exist at the edge of the world. Vincent pressed his face against the window, watching tiny villages appear and disappear in the valleys below. Pine forests covered the slopes, and in the distance the high Tatras rose like ancient guardians, their peaks still dusted with snow even though it was late spring. He had been searching for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of traveling from village to village, showing people photos of wooden churches with blue roofs, humming the melody to anyone who would listen, asking about old musicians who played in town squares. Most people looked at him like he was crazy. A few felt sorry for him and offered directions to other villages. Nobody had any answers. His money was running out. He was staying in the cheapest hostels he could find, sometimes sleeping on buses to save the cost of a room. He ate bread and cheese from small shops, drank water from mountain streams. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty. He hadn't shaved in days. The famous concert pianist had become a wandering beggar, chasing a ghost through the mountains. The bus dropped him in a village called Shtiar. It was so small it barely appeared on maps. Maybe 200 people lived here, their houses scattered along a single main road. Mountains surrounded the valley on all sides, making Vincent feel like he had descended into a hidden world that time had forgotten. He walked into the village as evening approached. There was a small church, but its roof was red, not blue. His heart sank. Another dead end. Still, he had come this far. He might as well ask around before moving on to the next village on his list. An inn stood near the center of town, a traditional building with wooden balconies and flower boxes in the windows. Inside, a young woman was wiping down tables. She looked up as Vincent entered, probably surprised to see a stranger. Tourists didn't often come here, especially not ones who looked as rough as he did. "Do you speak English?" Vincent asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Yes, a little," she replied, her accent thick but her words clear enough. "You need room?" "Maybe. First, I need to ask you something." He pulled out his phone, opening the audio file he had listened to 1,000 times. "Have you ever heard this melody before?" He played a few seconds. The woman paused, her head tilting to the side as she listened. Then something changed in her expression. Recognition flickered across her face. That is Mr. Kovac's song, she said softly. Vincent's legs nearly gave out. He grabbed the edge of a table to steady himself. What, you know this? You know who played this? Mr. Kovac, he lives here in the village. He used to play piano, taught many children. He is very old now. She pointed toward the window. His house is at the edge of town, past the school. Small cottage with green shutters. Vincent barely heard the rest of her directions. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. After 6 months of searching, after destroying his career and spending every dollar he had, after traveling through countless villages, he had found it. Found him. The pianist was real, was here, was alive. He practically ran down the road following the woman's directions. Past the church, past a small school, past houses where families were sitting down to dinner. The cottage with green shutters stood alone, surrounded by a garden that had probably been beautiful once but was now overgrown with weeds. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Vincent stood at the gate for a long moment, suddenly terrified. What if this was wrong? What if this Mr. Kovac wasn't the pianist from the recording? What if Vincent had come all this way for nothing? His hand shook as he reached for the gate latch. Before he could open it, the front door of the cottage opened. An old man stepped out, probably to see who was standing at his gate. He was thin and stooped, with white hair and a face carved by decades of weather and time. His hands, Vincent noticed immediately, were twisted with arthritis, the fingers bent at unnatural angles. "Can I help you?" the old man asked in accented but clear English. Vincent's throat was too tight to speak. Instead, he pulled out his phone and played the recording. The melody filled the quiet evening air, floating across the overgrown garden. The old man froze. His eyes, which had been politely curious, suddenly filled with tears. He gripped the door frame for support, his twisted hands trembling. When the recording ended, he stood in silence for what felt like an eternity. "Where did you get this?" he finally whispered. "A woman gave it to me. In Prague, 6 months ago. I've been searching for the pianist ever since." Vincent's words tumbled out in a rush. "Was it you? Did you play this?" The old man nodded slowly, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "Yes, that is me. Recorded 50 years ago by my wife Anna before she died. I never knew. I never knew she kept it." He looked at Vincent with confused wonder.
"How did that woman get it?"
"Who was she?" "I don't know. She never told me her name. She just said I needed to hear it." Vincent felt his own eyes burning. "I'm a pianist. Was a pianist. I've played in the greatest concert halls in the world. But when I heard this recording, I realized I'd never really played at all. Not like you did. Not with whatever it is you had." The old man studied Vincent for a long moment, then gestured toward the door. "Come inside. We should talk." The cottage was small and simple. A wood stove provided warmth. Photographs covered every surface, showing a life fully lived. A young couple on their wedding day. Children at various ages. Graduations, holidays, ordinary moments made precious by time. In the corner sat an old upright piano, its wood scarred and its keys yellowed. The old man made tea, his arthritic hands moving slowly but surely. They sat at a wooden table, and Vincent learned the story he had crossed an ocean to hear. His name was Joseph Kovac. He had been a promising pianist once, studying at the Moscow Conservatory in his 20s. His teachers said he could have a great career, could play with major orchestras, could become famous. But then his parents fell ill, both of them within months of each other. There was no one else to care for them, so Joseph came home. He married Anna, a teacher at the local school. They had 3 children. He gave piano lessons to village children, charging almost nothing because most families couldn't afford much. He worked in the gardens during summer, cut firewood in winter, and played piano whenever he could. Not for audiences or critics, just for himself and for Anna. "Was it hard?" Vincent asked. "Giving up your career?" Joseph considered the question, sipping his tea. "At first, yes. I was angry. Felt like my life was being stolen from me. But Anna, she helped me understand something important." He smiled at the memory. She said, "Joseph, music is not about how many people hear you. It is about why you play." I thought about that for a long time. He stood slowly and walked to the piano. His fingers touched the keys gently, like greeting old friends. "The piece you heard, I composed it during the worst year of my life. Anna had cancer. We knew she was dying. I would sit here at night after the children were asleep and I would play. Every note was for her. Every phrase was a memory, a prayer, a thank you for the years we had together. Vincent felt tears streaming down his face. That's what I heard. That's what made it so powerful. You weren't playing to impress anyone. You were playing to say goodbye, Joseph finished quietly. To tell her everything I felt but couldn't put into words. That is what music is for, young man. Not for concert halls or critics. Music is for speaking the language the heart knows but the mouth cannot form. They talked until late into the night. Joseph told stories about his life, about teaching children who went on to become teachers and doctors and farmers, about growing old with Anna, about losing her and learning to live with the absence. He spoke about his 3 children, now scattered across Europe with families of their own, about his granddaughter who was learning piano, showing the same promise he once had. You want to know the secret? Joseph asked as the night grew deep. The secret everyone searches for? He leaned forward, his eyes bright despite his age. There is no secret. You cannot learn it from a book or a teacher. You can only live it. Music without life is just noise. But life without music, he smiled. That is not living at all. Vincent felt something break open inside him. All his training, all his technique, all his perfect performances. He had learned to play the piano brilliantly. But he had forgotten to live. Forgotten why music mattered. Forgotten that every note should mean something beyond the technical achievement of playing it correctly. I don't know how to do that, Vincent admitted. I've spent my whole life practicing, performing, trying to be the best. I don't know how to just live. Joseph stood and placed a twisted hand on Vincent's shoulder. Then perhaps it is time to learn. Stay here a while. Help me in the garden. Meet the people in the village. Play piano with my granddaughter. Learn what life tastes like when you are not performing it. He smiled. You came all this way to find me. But I think maybe you came to find yourself. Vincent looked around the small cottage, at the photographs of a life lived fully, at the old piano that had witnessed so much joy and sorrow, at the old man whose playing had changed everything. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something like peace settling over him. I'd like that, he said quietly. I'd like to stay. Joseph squeezed his shoulder. Good, tomorrow we plant potatoes. No piano. Just earth and sun and honest work. The music will wait. It always does. Vincent woke the next morning to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through thin curtains. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he remembered. A small cottage in a Slovak village. The end of a 6-month search. The beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Joseph was already awake, making coffee in the small kitchen. Good morning, he said with a smile. Ready to work? They spent that day in the garden just as Joseph had promised. No piano, no music. Just the 2 of them turning soil, planting potatoes, pulling weeds that had taken over during the long winter. Vincent's hands, so accustomed to piano keys, blistered within an hour. His back ached from bending. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool mountain air. But something about the work felt good. Honest. Real. His mind, which had been racing for months, finally began to quiet. There was something meditative about digging in the earth, about the simple rhythm of plant and cover and water. Joseph worked beside him, moving slowly because of his age and his twisted hands, but never complaining. During lunch, they sat on the porch and Joseph told him about the village. About families who had lived here for generations. About traditions that went back centuries. About the slow rhythm of life in a place where nothing much changed. It was the opposite of Vincent's world of concert tours and hotel rooms and constant travel. Why did you really come here? Joseph asked, studying Vincent's face. The truth, Vincent thought about the question. I heard your recording and realized my entire career was empty. That I had been playing perfectly but saying nothing. I thought if I could find you, you could teach me your secret. And now that you found me, now I don't know, Vincent admitted. You said there's no secret, that I just need to live, but I don't know how to do that. I've been performing my whole life. Even when I wasn't on stage, I was performing. Being the successful pianist, the prodigy, the genius. I don't know who I am without all that. Joseph nodded slowly. Then we start with the basics. You will stay here. Help me with work. Meet people. Live like a regular person for a while. No performances. No pressure. Just being. The days turned into weeks. Vincent fell into a rhythm he had never experienced before. He helped Joseph with gardening and house repairs. He walked through the village, gradually meeting the residents. At first, they were suspicious of the stranger, but slowly they warmed to him. He was just another person, not a famous pianist, not a prodigy. Just Vincent, the young man staying with Mr. Kovac. He met the baker who made bread every morning at 4, the farmer who had raised sheep in these mountains for 40 years, the school teacher who ran the small classroom where village children learned, the mechanic who could fix anything with duct tape and determination. These were people who would never attend his concerts, who had probably never heard of him. And somehow that was liberating. 3 weeks into his stay, Joseph's granddaughter came to visit. Her name was Helena, and she was 8 years old with serious eyes and small hands that barely reached an octave on the piano. She had been learning from Joseph for 2 years, and she played with the careful concentration of someone who loved music, but hadn't yet been corrupted by pressure or expectations. "Will you play something for us?" Joseph asked Vincent one evening after dinner. Vincent hesitated. He hadn't touched a piano since arriving, hadn't even thought about it much. But he sat down at the old upright, its keys worn smooth by generations of fingers. Helena sat beside him, watching with wide eyes. He started to play Chopin, a nocturne he had performed countless times. But after a few measures, he stopped. It felt wrong, too formal, too perfect. He looked at Helena's expectant face, at Joseph sitting in his chair with that patient smile. "Actually," Vincent said, "why don't you play something for me, Helena?" The little girl beamed. She positioned her small hands and began a simple folk melody, something her grandfather had taught her. She made mistakes. Her timing wasn't quite right. Her fingers stumbled over difficult passages. But she played with such joy, such pure happiness, that Vincent felt his throat tighten. When she finished, she looked up at him nervously. "Was that okay?" "It was perfect," Vincent said, and meant it. Over the following weeks, Vincent began teaching Helena. But it wasn't like any teaching he had done before. He didn't focus on technique or perfection. Instead, he asked her questions. "What does this song make you feel? What story are you trying to tell? Why do you love this melody?" They played together, made up silly songs, laughed when they hit wrong notes. One afternoon, Joseph asked Vincent a question that changed everything. "Why do you play piano?" Vincent opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He had been asked this question before in various forms throughout his career, but he had never really thought about it. He played because he was good at it, because it brought him success, because people applauded, but why? What was the actual reason? "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Then you must find out," Joseph said simply. "Until you know why, everything else is just movement, just sound. Music without purpose is like a letter with no words, a gift with nothing inside." That night, Vincent couldn't sleep. He lay in the small guest room, listening to the sounds of the village at night. Dogs barking in the distance, wind moving through pine trees, the creak of the old house settling. He thought about his life, about the years spent practicing, performing, chasing perfection, about Lisa's note saying he had stopped being human, about the emptiness he felt after every standing ovation. When had he last played piano for the simple joy of it? When had music been something other than work, other than competition, other than proof of his worth? He couldn't remember. Maybe never. Maybe he had been so focused on being the best that he had forgotten why being good at something mattered in the first place. The next morning, he woke early and went to the piano. He didn't play Chopin or Rachmaninoff or any of the pieces he had perfected. Instead, he played a simple folk melody he had heard the villagers singing. Then another. He played badly at first, searching for the notes, making mistakes. But slowly something began to shift inside him. He started composing. Nothing complex or impressive. Just simple melodies that captured moments from his time in the village. A tune about planting potatoes. A song about Helena's laughter. A piece about watching sunset paint the mountains gold. The music was imperfect, rough. Nothing like the polished performances he used to give. But it was honest. It was real. It was his. Joseph listened from the kitchen, tears running down his weathered face, a smile on his lips. The weeks turned into months. Vincent stayed in HDR through the entire summer. He helped harvest vegetables from the garden he had planted. He attended the village festival, where people danced to accordion music and drank homemade wine. He played piano at a wedding, simple songs that everyone knew, and felt more fulfilled than he had after any concert at Carnegie Hall. He reconnected with his family, called his mother and actually talked to her, not just exchanged brief pleasantries, spoke with his brother about life and fatherhood and things that mattered, made plans to visit them, to meet his nephew, to be present in ways he never had been before. He didn't miss performing, didn't miss the pressure or the travel or the constant need to be perfect. He was learning what Joseph had tried to teach him, that life was the music and music was just a way of expressing life. You couldn't have one without the other. In late August, Joseph suggested that Vincent give a small recital at the village community center. Nothing formal, just a chance to share some music with the people who had welcomed him into their lives. Vincent agreed, though the thought of performing again made him nervous in a way he had never felt before Carnegie Hall. The night of the recital, about 30 people showed up. Villagers mostly. Helena sat in the front row with her parents. Joseph sat beside her, his twisted hands folded in his lap. There were no critics, no recording equipment, no pressure, just people who had come to hear their friend play. Vincent sat at the old upright piano they had moved into the community center. He had prepared nothing grand. No Rachmaninoff or Chopin. Instead, he played a simple piece by Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata. But he played it differently than he ever had before. He played it for Joseph, for Helena, for these people who had taught him what music was really for. Every note carried weight. Not the weight of technical perfection, but the weight of genuine emotion. He played with all the joy and sorrow and gratitude he had discovered during his summer in the village. He made mistakes. His fingers stumbled in a few places, but he played with his heart finally, completely, honestly open. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence. Then Joseph stood, tears streaming down his face, and began to applaud. The others joined in. Helena was crying. Some of the older women wiped their eyes. It wasn't the thunderous ovation of a concert hall. It was quieter, more personal, but it meant more than any applause Vincent had ever received. After the recital, as people were leaving, Joseph pulled Vincent aside. "That," he said quietly, "is what I heard in your playing tonight. The thing you were searching for. You found it." "What did I find?" Vincent asked. "Yourself," Joseph said simply. "You finally played as yourself, not as the person you thought you should be. That is the only secret. Be honest, be human. Let the music carry your truth, whatever that truth is." Vincent stayed one more week, then prepared to return to New York. He didn't know what his future held. His career was probably destroyed. His savings were gone. He would have to start over somehow. But he felt more ready for life than he ever had before. On his last morning, he played one final time with Helena. They created a silly song about a bird who couldn't sing, and they laughed until their sides hurt. Joseph watched from his chair, smiling that patient smile. "Thank you," Vincent said as he prepared to leave. "For everything. For teaching me what I needed to learn." "I taught you nothing," Joseph replied. "You learned it yourself. I just gave you time and space to remember who you were before the world told you who to be." The bus carried Vincent back down the mountain, back toward the world he had left behind. But he was different now. He understood finally that being the best pianist alive meant nothing if you had forgotten why you played. That perfection without purpose was just an empty achievement. That music was meant to connect humans to each other, to express things words couldn't capture, to remind people they weren't alone in their joy or sorrow. Spring returned, and Vincent had been back in New York for almost a year. He was broke most of the time. His career as a world-famous pianist was definitely over. Music critics had stopped writing about him entirely. New prodigies had emerged to take his place in the spotlight. His name, which had once opened any door in the classical music world, now meant nothing to most people. But he was happy. Really happy. In a way he had never been during his years of success. He woke up each morning excited about teaching the kids at the community center. He went to sleep each night feeling like he had done something meaningful. The music he played now wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It came from his heart instead of just his hands. One evening, while walking home from the community center, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made him answer it. The voice on the other end was familiar but unexpected. It was the woman from Prague, the elderly woman who had given him the USB drive that started everything. Her voice was weaker now, tired but unmistakable. "Hello, Vincent," she said. "I wanted to see how you were doing." "Did you find what you were looking for?" Vincent stopped walking, his heart pounding. After all this time, after everything that had happened, she was calling him. "How did you get my number?" "How did you know?" "I have been watching your journey," she said cryptically. "I know you found Joseph. I know you learned what he had to teach. I'm proud of you. Who are you?" Vincent asked, the question that had haunted him for over a year. "How did you get that recording? Why did you give it to me?" There was a long pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I was Joseph's daughter-in-law. Anna's recording was among her things when she died. Joseph never knew she had kept it. I thought it should be heard by someone who needed to hear it." Vincent felt tears forming in his eyes. "Why me?" "Because I watched you play that night in Prague. I saw a man who had forgotten why music mattered. I hoped that Joseph's playing might remind you, and maybe through you it might remind others." They talked for another few minutes. She told him that Joseph was doing well, that Helena was progressing beautifully with her piano lessons, that the village missed the young man who had planted potatoes and learned to laugh again. Before hanging up, she said something that Vincent would carry with him forever. "Music is not about being the best, Vincent. It is about being truthful. You have learned this now. Don't forget it again." The line went dead, and Vincent stood on the sidewalk in Queens, crying freely as people walked past. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the breakdown that was really a breakthrough, the career he had lost and the life he had found, the difference between being famous and being useful, between being admired and being loved. He was no longer the greatest pianist of his generation. He would never again play at Carnegie Hall or win prestigious awards. But he was finally the person he was meant to be. A teacher, a friend, a human being who used music to connect with other human beings. And that, he realized, was more than enough. It was everything.